Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is just past 3:30 p.m. and it is May 6, 2025. We've just finished presentation of testimony and evidence in day 10 of the Karen Read and John O'Keefe retrial. It was a very bad day for Karen. Brutal testimony, brutal clips played for the jury, and just an overall devastating impact heading into lunch. Voicemails where Karen Read screamed profanities into John O'Keefe's voicemail at 12:37 a.m. on January 29, 2022. Just 5 or so, maybe 6 minutes after Karen Read is alleged to have struck John O'Keefe with her car with a blood alcohol level of between 0.14 and 0.282 to 4 times the legal limit while backing her car up at 75% on the accelerator to 24.2 miles an hour, thereupon reducing to 23.7 miles an hour at the alleged moment of impact with John in a millisecond with a 4.7 degree steering wheel correction to the right, therein causing John to trip over a burn, allegedly hitting the ground, striking his head with it, causing a traumatic brain injury, incapacitating John. Therein, Karen left John on that lawn to die in a blizzard from a combination of hypothermia and that traumatic brain injury. And ladies and gentlemen, those voicemails where Karen was screaming at John that she hated John, that he was a pervert, where Karen was using John's own niece and nephew against him, and the voicemails where when he lay dying alone on that lawn, his cell phone data has already proven to the jury John never moved from that lawn from 12:32 a.m. and 16 seconds on January 29, 2022 until he was discovered later that morning after 6 a.m. Just a devastating day for Karen Read, ladies and gentlemen. And so let's watch how it started. It started with 4 Karen Read supporters. Yes, the Free Karen Read movement is down to just 4 people. You can see them. You will see them at a certain point on the clip. I think I bring them up. And ladies and gentlemen, let me just say that this movement went from 11 people last week. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Just 4 Karen Read supporters this morning. It was less than 0 yesterday, if that's even possible. I think 0 is the lowest number. But then, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see Karen Read's arrival. You'll see that she did not look pleased, not surrounded by her normal throbs of fans, but instead only chirping birds and her lawyers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this was emblematic of the beginning of the day for Karen Read, and it only got worse from there. And yes, I realize the video went down, but it's back. The day only got worse for Karen Read as it went on. So yes, as we see that initial clip, ladies and gentlemen, then let's take a look at what happened next, because things did not get better for Karen Read as we see her walking into court, a lonely figure. Things got worse for Karen Read. The day started with Alan Jackson, who was already read at 11 a.m. And you can see, ladies and gentlemen, you can see it started immediately. The problem started immediately because Alan Jackson went for the paper towels. And we have the clip. We'll watch it here. It was a moment that stunned the towel universe. It happened nearly right off the bat. There was barely any presentation of evidence. All of a sudden, Alan Jackson just decided to start attacking paper towels. We must wait for the... Oh, I have it muted because I didn't want to listen to Karen talking before.
On the...
Or she didn't have anything to say. Here we go.
Do you see the rag in that photograph as well?
Yeah, we could call it agree to call it a rag or a paper towel.
You think it's a paper towel?
I'm not sure. It looks like a paper towel on the in the pictures, but it's a white object, yes.
For all I care, the white thing, that's
yes.
fine. All right, and you see
really?
that's...
Oh, really, Mr. Jackson? Mr. Jackson mistoweled that paper towel, ladies and gentlemen. It was egregious. It was offensive. It was hurtful. It was one of the worst moments of the day for towels. But now let's look at some of the never-before-seen footage of Karen Read giving interviews that was aired earlier today by Hank Brennan for Jurors. This was one of the moments of the day. Let's take a look.
So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
Thank you.
The comment?
That.
Thank you.
All right, your next witness.
One more, please, Your Honor. The Commonwealth moves into evidence and seeks to play clip number 17, please.
Okay.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked why was I saying, could I hit him, did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was, I've been out late, I've been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity of where I last saw him. I mean, they talk about the left side of the property and the right as if it's, Hammersmith Farms. It's a postage stamp. It's 50 feet. So he's in the front yard to the left of the front door, and no one's coming out of the house. Jen's telling me nobody's seen him. So I'm thinking, Jesus, was I starting to pull away and I ran over his foot? Like, he's roughly where I left him. So yeah, when I found him, I was thinking, did I clip him somehow?
You saw it, ladies and gentlemen. Those were the two new clips. Some of that was unaired footage. Disturbing remarks from Karen Read, basically admitting again in unaired footage with the documentary that Karen knew she may have hit John O'Keefe with her car. Oh my word, just devastating. And it did not get better for Karen Read from there, ladies and gentlemen, because look what happened next. Just a few minutes before lunch, this is what was played for the jury, and we are going to watch it in full, ladies and gentlemen. It was disturbing. Some of the voicemails we're going to watch right up till about 5:23 a.m. or so, when Karen left a strange voicemail, probably when she went back to see if John O'Keefe was still on that lawn at Fairview Road. But let's listen to what Karen said at 12:37 a.m. Just heartbreaking voicemails left for John as he was dying on that lawn alone. Oh my word, it was heartbreaking, friends, and Karen's reaction says it all.
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 2 is left. Some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play the voice message at 12:41:35?
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th, "I'm going home." The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "See you later," at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th. At 12:58:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows what the fuck you want, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. and 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second called, no sound.
Ms. Gilman?
That was it. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, "Your kids are cucking alone," at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th. Defendant texts John O'Keefe, "I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone," 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:04:27 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:28 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:58 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:23:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
That is very clear, folks. John, was that you? That was right at the time Karen's alleged to have went back to Fairview Road to see if John was still on that lawn. There's video of 5:08 a.m. Karen leaves John's house. 5:11 a.m. she's heading towards Canton Center. 5:18 a.m. she comes out the other side of Canton Center over by the train tracks, the Purple Line, heading towards the area of Fairview Road. And then this voicemail at 5:23. It's so clear it was John. Is that you?
Gilman?
Left with voice.
Ms. Gilman?
Clear as day, ladies and gentlemen. And then Karen continues calling John until Karen and her 2 witnesses, Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts, who Karen conveniently picked up so that Karen could go back to the scene in a vehicle that wasn't the murder weapon with a broken taillight, arrived to find John after 6 a.m., where John's phone, as indicated, showed he never moved from that lawn between 12:32 a.m. and 16 seconds that morning and when he was discovered after 6 a.m. Ladies and gentlemen, the day had one more highlight. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the day had one more highlight, and it was this clip, a further clip of Karen Reed showed to jurors right after lunch. They went to lunch with the voicemails you just saw, and they came back and saw this clip.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tapped him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this was the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the clip that was played after lunch. I think after that it was just Hank Brennan entering records. And then, ladies and gentlemen, the even more devastating moment in the afternoon, the video of Karen's taillight broken on police dash cam footage when the Canton PD were doing a wellness check on John O'Keefe's now thrice orphaned niece and nephew, who John adopted after their mother and father passed away within just a few short months of each other between November and January of 2013 and 2014. To do a wellness check on them and Karen's car. You can see the broken taillight, ladies and gentlemen. This was the afternoon testimony.
Could you stop, please, Ms. Gilman? I note that the time is 8:23:10. Do you remember the time when you got there?
I didn't make note of it mentally at that time, but I've since learned that, yes.
Is this video that you have just watched consistent with your memory that morning?
Yes.
The cruiser cam is showing two vehicles in the driveway. When you arrived that morning, did you know whose vehicles they were?
At that time, no.
At that time, did you pay any particular attention to either of those vehicles?
No.
If I could show Exhibit 10, please.
Jumping forward, tell friends. Now look at the zoom.
So does that appear to be a still photo from the video we just watched?
Yes.
And could I have Exhibit 11, please?
No, I was not.
Did you happen to pay any particular attention to the right side of the back of that car that morning?
No, I did not.
Look at that broken taillight, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that broken taillight on Karen Reed's car. It's as clear as day. Absolutely as clear as day. Ladies and gentlemen, we are reviewing day 10 of the testimony in the John O'Keefe and Karen Reed trial, and Alan the reddened Marshmallow Man Jackson's face in this clip says it all. The man who loves gesticulating more so than even Little Towel, sitting there reddened, sullened, sunken, with Mr. Reed and Mrs. Reed heartbroken behind him. The case has their defense, Reed's defense, devastated. 4 people outside court. The Free Karen Reed movement was artificial. It doesn't exist anymore, ladies and gentlemen. Someone asked if Karen switched cars. Yes, what happened was the very specific timeline of events. This is a recap, so I'll have to be quick, and we can talk about it more after the clip's over. Paula, what happened was 5:08 a.m. Karen Reed strikes John O'Keefe around 12:32 a.m. and 16 seconds on January 29, 2022. Karen Reed gets back to John's house around 12:37 a.m. That's when she connects to his Wi-Fi when she pulls in the garage, maybe a few seconds after 12:37 a.m. Karen Reed doesn't leave John's house until 5:08 a.m. the next morning. She's on John's Ring camera. There were 18 Ring videos between 12:37 a.m. and 5:08 a.m. on January 29th on John's system. Karen had access to the Ring system. 17 of them were deleted. The only one that wasn't shows Karen staging a fake bump into John's car. Karen leaves John O'Keefe's house, which wasn't even a real bump. She didn't make contact at all, and especially not near her taillight. Karen leaves John O'Keefe's house at 5:08 a.m. She's seen on video then at 5:11 a.m. heading towards Canton Center. She's seen at 5:18 a.m. coming out the other side of Canton Center near the train tracks, heading towards Fairview Road. 5:23 a.m. she makes the voicemail. She calls John. Was that you? 5:35 a.m. Karen gets to Jen McCabe's house. That's when Karen Reed meets up with Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts. The 3 women drive back to John's house at Meadows Ave between 5:35 a.m. and maybe right before 6 a.m. The Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts frantically search John's house. Mind you, Karen didn't even really know Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts, and Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts didn't even know each other really that well. And as a result, ladies and gentlemen, Jen and Carrie are searching John's house frantically. Karen's standing in a room alone, upstairs, not searching at all. Eventually, Karen encourages the women to go back to Fairview Road. They do so in Carrie's car, having left Karen's Lexus with its smashed tail light that she pointed out to Jen and Carrie at around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. ladies and gentlemen, that's when the women get into Kerry Roberts' car and drive back to Fairview, arriving past 6 a.m. or so. Whereupon, with Kerry in the driver's seat, Jen McCabe in the front passenger, and Karen in the back. Karen's freaking out. Somehow Karen sees John O'Keefe's body in the snow, through a blizzard, in the dark, before the women pull past the tree line of Fairview Road, probably because she had been there at 5:23 p.m. And ladies and gentlemen, this has become quite an extensive Day 10 recap, and we finish the recap with what was a ridiculous moment as Karen Reed and Alan Jackson had an extended, protracted huddle. Alan, the reddened marshmallow man, Jackson himself. You can see the redness in his face emanating off the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, it's incredible. I have never seen a man so red. Alan Jackson and Karen Reed huddling, Karen Reed issuing the instructions. All right, towel friends, we have fully got back to the top of the towel feed. Now listen, my name's Grant Smith Ellis. I'm going to close this clip. I'm going to go back to talking to the towel friends, but let me say, if you want to see more coverage of the Karen Reed and John O'Keefe retrial, tomorrow, Tuesday, May 7th, 7:30 a.m., I will be streaming. I'll look forward to joining you for the pre-show and chatting about things, and then we will have exclusive Karen Cam coverage. None of the other networks even covered the Karen Cam today, but Towel Stream had the record of it all. YouTube.com/@GrantSmithEllis. Please feel free to join us. Thank you for listening to the Day 10 recap. Now let me go chat with